Okay, now we're into chapter 10 and the chapter on gender and sex. So we start with the biology first, which primary sexual characteristics, secondary sexual characteristics. Primary sexual characteristics are the genitalia, and secondary sexual characteristics are what happened to you during puberty. So for women, larger breast, wider hips, narrower shoulders, fatty tissue throughout the body, and menstruation. You guys really drew the good card there. For men, enlarged genitals, a deeper voice, greater height, more muscular build, and more body and facial hair. And for all of you young guys out there, enjoy the hair while you can. As you age, it will start disappearing in places that you want it, showing up in places that you probably didn't think you needed it. We have the term intersex person, who are born with reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't correspond to a typical definition of male or female. There used to be the term hermaphrodite. Long ago, before we could do a good chromosome test, because one is either XY or XX, the doctors would assign a sex. And that's where we've encountered some interesting data that's not in your book about how intersex folks that were assigned have a higher incidence of homosexuality and feeling that they're transgendered, which brings us to transgender people. These are people whose gender identity does not match the person's assigned sex. And so your book looks Caitlyn Jenner, who used to be Bruce Jenner, who used to be an Olympic athlete. And there's a lot of focus on him. But again, as a Marxist, I can't help but notice that, because of fame and wealth, his transgendered identity is celebrated in magazines, and he's talked about as being brave and things like that, where those that would be poor or middle class, of course, not even being able to afford such expensive surgery, are rarely referred to in such glowing terms. Sexual orientation, page 286. We were going through homosexuality, heterosexuality, bisexuality, and I want this in your notes. One that they leave out, those that are completely abstinent from sex. There's actually a fairly large group. I find it interesting that the book doesn't refer to them, probably because there's no social organizing for abstinence as, I guess, a lifestyle in the popular press, or at least maybe the book's unaware of that. So they talk about measuring sexual orientation. Many researchers feel that, again, that this is a spectrum, that one is not exclusively one or the other. From a sociological perspective, I find it interesting that bisexuality is treated in a way sort of at times dismissively by both heterosexuals and homosexuals, because of this perception that they refuse to be on one team or another, which again, us and them, remember, us and them. Population estimates for those. So we've got about a 4% figure of people that are self-identifying as LGBTQ. And then there's a discussion of discrimination. So take a look at the court ruling, Obergefell versus Hodges. That's a 2015 case. And all of this seems to be focused on a perception of something called homophobia, extreme prejudice and discriminative actions towards gays or lesbians, bisexuals, or transgendered persons. Which I find is interesting because technically homophobia means fear of gay people. And I don't know, are we afraid of gay people? You see a group of gay people walking down the streets, are you afraid of them? They're going to beat you up or something? I usually hear about a fear of what's called the gay agenda. This is where it's considered a plot that gay people want equal rights and equal access. And I guess maybe there is a plot there that they do want to be treated as equal, not lose their job or housing based on their sexual orientation. But there's certainly a lot of hate crimes that are focused on that, and most of them very peculiar in that the people say that they hate gay folks, yet they go out looking for gay people to beat up, which is strange and suspect activity. But now we, of course, in sociology are much more focused on gender. Now, where are we going with the gender thing? Well, again, because with gender, this is how society treats you based on your mannerisms, your dress, your actions. The book talks about gender role, the attitudes, beliefs, and activities that are socially defined as appropriate for someone's sex. And then there's gender identity, which is how you specifically perceive and do gender for yourself. They talk about body consciousness in chapter 11, and depending on which book you have, you might have a picture of a really skinny guy, which actually nobody seems to relate to or get upset about. But then there's the weightlifting girl, and everyone seems to be very focused on her, and everyone's like, oh my God. And when I ask people about that, I say, what's so objectionable about that? And then one guy, God love him, he actually said it, looks like she can kick my butt. And I thought, oh, well, there you have it. I guess that's threatening, if you look outside of your appropriate gender role. If you perceive your gender identity having, let's say, big muscles as a girl, that's going to freak some guys out. Now, I want you to make note, this is not in your book, of an author named Naomi Wolf. She had a book called The Beauty Myth, in which she goes through, it's an interesting book, well written, in which she discusses her view that beauty is a male construct used to hurt women. And her evidence is sort of kind of a look at history and fashion statements and stuff. And then the increase in anorexia and bulimia in the past, let's say 30, 40 years. So her proof goes along the lines of back in 1900, a size 16 person, corseted in to one of those big black boat dresses to the point you could barely move or breathe. That was considered the height of beauty. Meanwhile, anyone under that size would have been considered much too fragile to marry or to bear children. Then she talks about how Marilyn Monroe, who is still a sexual icon, was a size 10 or 12. And then, of course, very few size 10 or 12s would be, the lead movie star in films today. And then she talks about how today in modern fashion, you've got these 6 foot tall, like 100-pound twig people that fashion people use for clothing and so forth. And she points to that and says, look, see, there's the proof. Guys are trying to use beauty and an unreasonable standard to keep women off balance. And I was like, it's a very interesting book, interesting point. Though I had to point out, as I read that, when you look at who runs the big fashion magazines, Elle, Maribel, all that, Cosmo, it's all women. Now, are we guys so crafty that we get women to do our dirty work, to try to unbalance women with an unfair beauty standard? That just doesn't sound something like we would do. When I thought about it more, when somebody says, oh my God, blank, you've lost weight, as a compliment, that's almost always a woman talking to another woman. Don't really ever hear 2 guys go, hey Bob, lost some weight, you looking good. Don't ever hear that. On more reflection, it occurs to me that it seems actually like women use this beauty standard against other women, and unreasonable weight standards against other women, more so than men. Something to think about. So we are moving forward, and we get to sexism and the discussion of patriarchy. This is a male-dominated system, or matriarchy, a female-dominated hierarchical system. And then remember I said that we would talk about Linsky again, and here we are talking about Linsky and gender stratification, historical perspective. And again, we find, the sexes being fairly equal in the hunting and gathering period, and then slowly women's role decreases through horticultural, agrarian, industrial, and now women's roles tend to dramatically vary based on their class and race and age position in society, as whether they're considered okay. So how do we get here? How did this whole process start? We look to socialization. We're socialized into the gender roles that we have. And who do we look through first? We look at parents. We know that when we dress a child up, it's a boy child, we dress it in girls' clothes and give it, an infant, to a group of adults. They play with it differently, interact with it differently when they think it's a girl child versus a boy child. We have different toys for girls and boys. Girls get baby dolls and boys get trucks and guns. Though I do have to say, you women had the scariest of all toy, the Easy Bake Oven. This was a terrible toy. For those of you not familiar, it's a big plastic box with a light bulb as its heating element. And you stick things in there to heat up, and you're supposed to, like, it comes with a brownie mix, supposed to wait 10 minutes for this thing to cook. No one ever waited the 10 minutes. You pull it out, it's molten lava. You're supposed to wait another 5 minutes for it to cool. No one ever waited for it to cool. You're shoving this lava stuff into your face, burning your face off. And if you leave it turned on overnight, of course, it melts the big plastic box. It's a terrible toy. Peers and gender socialization. This is where, I don't know how your peers were, but this is where you learned a great many lies about where babies come from, or how dating should be done. I know that the gender standards, again, for the era that I grew up in, had a lot of very flawed belief systems and a strange focus on chewing tobacco. Lots of chewing tobacco in my town, probably because it was a small Texas town. They talk about gender bias. This is where we teachers play a negative role, in which we give boys too much attention and girls not enough attention. Though that's being reassessed some. Yes, boys do act up and get attention, but girls become much more adept at getting positive attention by sort of playing the system or setting up front and doing the things a teacher wants, in elementary school, to get the kind of attention that they want. We talk about sports and gender socialization, and the big thing that I want you to write down here is Title IX. Title IX is that piece of legislation that said, if you have guy sports in college and girl sports, they must be equal and paired. And that caused a great deal of consternation for a lot of schools, because